Welcome to Sustainable Leadership Live. I'm Lisa Danforth, your host, and today I have the dynamic Dr. Sweta Chawla. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so excited to be here, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the advantage of feminine leadership, which I just think is so important. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. It doesn't necessarily mean feminine, it's a way of being. But before we jump in, I'd love to share just a little bit about Dr. Sweta so you know where she's coming from. So Dr. Sweta is a former professor of pharmacy and clinical and residency director turned speaker, facilitator, leadership coach, and an author. Be sure to check out her book. And through her natural leadership model, she empowers her clients to create personal structures that leverage their natural brilliance. And again, today we are talking about that advantage of the feminine leadership. So I say, we've got 20 minutes. Let's jump right in. Share your brilliance.
Thank you so much for having me here, Lisa. And I'm sure some people are kind of thinking, well, what does feminine leadership actually mean? Or what does that feminine advantage mean? And as you already alluded to, when I say feminine advantage, I'm not talking about females per se or gender, especially in this changing world today, but more of qualities that tend to be associated with the feminine, which in today's world, in the business world, is often known as kind of like soft skills, which I don't love that word at all, or emotional intelligence, for example, is another way that we describe this. And what I have found in myself and clients that I work with is that many of us have these qualities innately within us, but we sometimes compartmentalize them and we don't bring them into leadership, or we don't bring them into the professional world, because so much of our culture has been focused on a lot of masculine qualities of, competition and, striving, et cetera. And so when I discovered for myself that in my own journey of starting from being in pharmacy school, that there were two sides of me. There was this part that was this struggling striver that was trying to improve myself, get the good grades, get the letters behind my name. And then there was this other part of me, which was the thriver, that was much more connected to this kind of these innate feminine qualities, where it was about service and expressing myself and listening to kind of my own inner guidance and taking risk and experimenting, et cetera. That when I left and studied more about different kinds of leadership, did I realize that, that's kind of the feminine path, that's the feminine advantage. And when I use it deliberately, when I lead with it, I have found that my success is much more sustainable and that of my clients as well. So it's something that I'm excited to bring out and name, because I think a lot of people feel this and they experience it, but don't have language for identifying it. And when we name things, one of my secret sauces being a namer, we're more connected to it and we can use it, deliberately, as I mentioned.
Yeah, I noticed that on your website, naming things, which is so important, because until we can sort of name it, I believe it's hard to anchor and really start leaning into it.
Exactly.
So I hear what you're saying about the whole soft skills thing. It is hard. And where I find it's frustrating is that more and more studies are showing that those soft skills are truly what organizations, corporations need, and they understand it, but yet they're still investing more heavily into the more technical type of skills. How can we start bringing more of the soft skills, feminine leadership, that energy of being, not necessarily doing? We need both.
Yes.
But how do we start bringing that forward more in an authentic way?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. You use the word authentic. And a lot of clients that come to me, they're, in a place of reinvention, whether that's looking to reinvent how they work and lead within their existing organization, or they're looking to make a career transition, let's say. And sometimes they use this language, sometimes they don't use this language, but what they're looking for is more authenticity. They're highly driven, like myself, and I'm sure a lot of your audience as well, where there's a prescription for success and what that looks like. And as you mentioned, it's very heavily focused on technical skills, et cetera. But then again, there's this part of them that feels like they're compartmentalizing, or some words that my clients use are also like code switching. And
what was that?
Code switching.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah. So, there's the way you are with people that you feel safe with, whether that's your friends or your family or whatnot. And then you come to work and then you get that mask on, right? Of how I need to be presenting, how I need to look, et cetera. And I can tell, like, people, whether they're, again, aware of it or not, they feel the, how much, that really kind of weighs them down. that
Mhm.
takes a lot of energy to code switch. And so it really begins with starting there, like naming that that's what's happening. First of all, I'm putting a mask on when I'm at work. I don't really feel like I can authentically express myself. And oftentimes when clients come to me, they say, I want to trust myself to be, more fully expressed, to put my ideas out in the world, to be more of me. And they usually through our coaching session, they'll say to me, oh my God, I realized like I had to like know myself first before I could trust myself. And I have to often say to them, that's actually the journey of trusting yourself, is to take that time to really get intimate with yourself. And so there is a lot, I think it's a ripe time now where we hear a lot about bring your whole self to work, but I think a lot of people are skeptical. What does that actually
Right.
mean?
And is it okay, or am I gonna get
Exactly.
dinged?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Like, oh, people say that, but am I going to get reprimanded or something? Going to have a microaggression put against me or something like that. And so I really think it's baby steps and really having that time with yourself about what is it that you really feel like you want to bring into the workspace that's really, present for you and alive for you. And that is in service to the organization,
Mhm.
because yes, it's about being your whole self, and you're part of a community. You have work, you have, whether it's clients or whether you are part of an organization, it's really about expressing yourself in service to the we. And I think that when you realize that, for
Mhm.
some people, it's like, I don't want to, why should I just be my whole self? People, they earned the right to see the full me, et cetera. Or is it safe? Those are some of the things that hold people back. But when you kind of see that it's connected to this greater purpose, which to me is very much the feminine, the feminine is all about community. It's all about, collaboration, where so much of the masculine is about, that solo lone wolfing, the striving, competition, etc. And so when you can see it from this lens, I think it gives people more permission to be a little bit more of themselves. And that can look different for everyone. It can look like changing the way you dress, right? Like
Mhm.
wearing earrings when you normally wouldn't wear earrings. And before we got on here, you mentioned a post that I put on LinkedIn about how I was like, I don't know if this picture would have been appropriate for LinkedIn, but it felt so much in alignment with the podcast that I was on. And it's those little baby steps that
Mhm.
big shift when it comes to self-acceptance, which is to me the core of like really excavating our brilliance, is finding self-security in who we are. And so again, it's that intimacy of just the self-inquiry, the reflection of what part of me do I want to express a little bit more, and what baby step can I use to express it that's in service of the greater.
Yeah, I really think you hit it on the head there with that safety, that psychological safety, even with ourselves, right? We've been taught from a very young age of what's right, what's wrong, how we need to show up, what we need to say, what we can't say, and we don't have that safety, that belief within ourselves to truly show up authentically. So how the heck are we going to do it at work? Right? We've
Exactly.
been we've been told. I know from a young age, I definitely had to be someone other than I was in order to sort of fit in order to not be yeah, reprimanded or whatever it is. And that belief about how we need to show up impacts with us within our leadership style. Can
Exactly.
you share some skills or some tools or some habits that people could start leaning into, or questions to ask themselves to start exploring that and getting a little uncomfortable, but not necessarily, going all the way right off the bat?
Absolutely. So one thing that I often do with my clients is I have them fill out this worksheet, which is basically kind of an assessment. And sometimes I call it an energy assessment, sometimes I call it a passion assessment. But really, I believe in data collection. And so much of us, that striving culture, the performance culture, right, is based on, best practices and habits and people telling us how to be. And this journey of what I believe is natural leadership is more about identifying how you naturally shine and how you can bring that forward, and connecting on how who you are again serves the greater good. And so I really believe in specific personal data. And so, I mean, you don't have to, have some kind of elaborate worksheet. Really just take note of throughout your day, when did you feel like you were safe? When did you feel like you were expressing yourself? When did you
Mhm.
feel connected? When did you feel like you were having impact? So whatever the thing that you're missing, you know, some people come to me and they say, I'm looking for more impact. I'm looking for, some others say more meaning, others say more passion, etc. And so whatever it is that you feel like you're yearning and that you're not receiving in your professional space or even your personal space, is just break it down a little bit more, get more specific, and go through your day and see what are the things that make you feel alive, and then also what are the things that drain you
Mm.
and what contributed to that. And oftentimes, you know, we look at the external, right? It's my boss, it's the work culture, it's, you know, systemic oppression, and all of those are completely valid. So I don't want to take away that truth and that reality. However, I do believe part of leadership is finding your own agency, your own authentic authority, and what are the micro shifts that you can make. And for me, that's about really having the self-awareness to know when you are at your greatest, when you are in your brilliance, and amplifying and watering that.
Absolutely. And leaning into it. When you were talking before, you were, the word that popped into my mind were triggers. Like, what are the triggers that have you quieting your voice? What are the triggers? And when we can look at those instances without any judgment or opinion, but just start pausing and
Yeah.
observing, okay, as an individual, is it a
Yeah.
situation? Is it, you know, when you're standing on stage speaking, whatever it is, but looking at those triggers so that you can start noticing, where do you lean into either more masculine or feminine, or where do you lean into silencing your voice?
Yeah.
And it's
So
just that awareness that helps.
yes, and the feminine to me is all about the body, right? And our
Mhm.
body is our greatest communicator.
It is,
And
isn't it?
so when you're in spaces, right? If you're in a meeting, let's say, and there's something that you want to bring up, there's an idea you want to share, but you notice your heart is beating really hard, you know, or your hands are getting clammy, your breath is getting a little bit more shallow, and just having that awareness of, okay, I feel nervous here. Right. I feel nervous. And then, you know, later on, you can reflect on it a little bit more. But again, just naming it in the moment, I
Mhm.
find so liberating because, again, it takes a lot of energy to try to repress our own experiences. And we don't have
Can you
to
repeat that?
externalize.
Can you
It takes
repeat that just to drive that home?
yes, it takes a lot of energy to repress our own experience.
Mm.
And, you know, we don't always have to externalize it. Some clients that I work with, part of their leadership journey is being vulnerable and, you know, expressing, saying, you know, sharing vulnerable things if they're in a position where they're have to, you know, they believe that they have to hold a higher standard or they have to be an expert in what something. And there's a, you know, a part of their life journey, like they have a child that's neurodivergent, or they themselves have an experience where, you know, they've gone through sobriety, and, you know, those are the things that we need to hold back. But part of their journey might be to share that in their professional world, and that's what makes them to feel more authentic. That makes it helps them to be more in their leadership, again, in service to whatever it is
Mhm.
that they're leading. For others, it might be just about giving yourself permission to be vulnerable with yourself and to say, you know, I don't feel qualified enough, or I'm afraid of failure. And that's why I'm not putting my hand up. And that's why I'm not sharing, or that's why I'm not getting on camera, because I have an image of what I should look or act like to, you know, be visible in this space. And I don't measure up to that. And just noticing it and then questioning it. Like the next step is to question it and say, okay, well, what is that ideal that I'm putting myself to? What is the image that I'm putting myself up to? And are there other examples where I can see myself, or am I feeling called to maybe revolutionize that image? And that's what happened for me when I got the, you know, insight. And that to me is how the feminine, you know, it speaks as well. It's more like this internal guidance
Mhm.
that
So
I
true.
needed to be a leadership coach. I was like, I don't I don't feel like a leader because I had a perception of what a leader should look like, how much money they should make. I stripped myself of my titles. I left pharmacy. I wasn't being called doctor anymore. I didn't have, you know, all the things that I'd associated with leader. And then
Mhm.
I discovered that, oh, it's because part of my work is to redefine what leadership means so that the people who have not, you know, have often been marginalized can see that they don't have to try to live up to an image, but that they can identify their own brilliance, and their presence in itself impacts culture. They don't have to strive to fit in or get letters or get permission or get external validation. They give themselves permission. And the more and more they give themselves permission and they get the feedback of the impact they have by being more of themselves, it empowers them more and more and more.
There's a beautiful synergistic quality to that. Absolutely. You had mentioned there is a view that we have been taught, told, pushed towards of what leadership is. And I love the fact that we are starting to question exactly what leadership is. And there is no one style of leadership by any means. And my belief is leadership starts from within.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to learn to lead ourselves and show up authentically before we can authentically lead and contribute to others.
Absolutely. It always starts with self-leadership. And that's my definition of leadership. My definition is, how are you being asked? How are you being led? And then it comes back to self-inquiry. How am I being asked to grow? What are some of the old narratives and dynamics that I need to release that are getting in my way of growing? And then, where the opportunities are coming? Where am I being asked? What are the conversations that I'm being drawn to? So that's that, like, how are you being led? And then what does success look like for you? So oftentimes it's, again, these external parameters, whether you're in an organization and there are metrics that you have to meet, or you're in business and you believe there are certain metrics that you need to meet. Sometimes we lose sight of, well, what really are the metrics? What are the results that are meaningful to us, that really have the impact that we care about? And, just, again, taking the time to ask ourselves those questions, to have that self-awareness, can really shift your experience of having more sustainable leadership, but also more fulfilling leadership as well.
And I believe that those go hand in hand. We can't have sustainability without fulfillment.
Absolutely.
I believe. How do you how do you invite someone to step forward when they are so uncomfortable in really exploring their self-lead? They want change, but it's scary, right? We have to go through an area of being uncomfortable to get back to an area of being comfortable with how we are.
Yes.
Are there some pathways, or with someone who is blocked, they know they want change? Can you just give us a couple of recommendations or questions or whatnot?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing is to meet people where they are. And so oftentimes, I know for myself, like, I was very stuck for a very long time. I mean, I was stuck for like 7 years in the same job, and I knew I needed change, but I had to, what's that saying? Like, first it's a whisper, and then it's a little nudge, and then it's like a hit on the head with a 2x4. And that's what happened to me. I had to have the 2x4. And that was part of my mission, which is like, you don't need to hit rock bottom, but, pain is a great motivator. But one of the values in my own coaching is to lead with joy, that you can have great transformation with joy as well. And I believe part of it is, meeting people where they are, not making yourself wrong if you're resistant. And I just gave a talk recently on overcoming imposter syndrome at a medical facility. And a lot of the feedback that I got was just like, thank you for normalizing this experience. That we all have these, whether it's perfectionism or I'm not enough, or, whatever are the internal beliefs. It's crazy to me that people think that they're the only one. I really think that's the cause of suffering. It's not the discomfort, it's the isolation, being, alone in that discomfort, not realizing there's hundreds of people around you experiencing the same and, same exact thing. And so the first place that I would have a person start is if they're very resistant to change, or they're having a lot of self-doubt around, expressing more of themselves or focusing more on themselves, it's probably because they're in an environment where that's not really celebrated. That's not the norm. There's a, more of a said or unsaid culture of like, no, you just continue to suppress yourself.
We're okay with you suppressing yourself. Just keep that out. Right?
Yes, exactly. So the first place I would start is to look for spaces where these conversations are happening, where this is normalized, and whether that's professional networks or just a person, like maybe you have somebody in your own field or your own profession who you admire. I have a book, as you had mentioned, and anybody listening to this can download it for free on my website, drswetachawla.com. And it has 21 kind of, little short stories and inquiry for people to, for themselves, to have self-reflection. And one of the first activities in there is to look for people that you admire. What are the qualities in those people that you admire? And so you can just start with that. Like, you don't actually have to connect to these people, but just start noticing where are you drawn? Where are the environments that help you to feel like you can give yourself more permission to be able to open up? And then as you start to identify that, there's, a saying that I love, which is, when a flower doesn't bloom, you don't blame the flower, you change the soil. And so, ultimately for me, leadership is that yourself, the security is within you, and you're, not so affected by your externals. But, the truth is, if you're anything like me and you're a people person, it's easy to become a people pleaser, right? And the environment does affect you. And so I think the place to start is to really evaluate your environment and what shifts can you make it in your environment. And when I started, that was also just like what I listened to. I listened to a lot of podcasts or interviews like this, which gave me inspiration. And then the next step was to hire a coach. And then, the next step was to join communities. And now my environment is, this is always the conversation in my environment. It didn't start that way.
Right. Which is so important. And I think you touched on something, that accountability is so incredibly key. We will tend to let ourselves down, but we won't let other people down. So like you said, hire a coach, or just have a buddy that's going to help you to, when you commit to something, to just check in with them. No judgment, no harm, no foul. But I believe that accountability piece is going to truly help us in stepping forward, because we have to say, I know I said I was going to do it, but I didn't do it. Yeah. Hey, Haley, thanks so much for joining us. Amen to that. Yeah. Dr. Sweta has some amazing things. And when we can step into it and start truly owning who we are unapologetically, is when we absolutely step into that leadership. So believe it or not, we are at time, or even a little over time. But I would love to ask you one question, if I may.
Yes.
What one habit or skill set has supported you in living and leading a sustainable life?
I think we've already alluded to it and talked about it, but it's really community. I have a lot of practices. I do a lot of meditation. I do a lot of self-care and whatnot, but I feel the game changer for me personally is being surrounded by people where I can be authentic, where I can have my lows, where I can celebrate my highs too. I mean, that's another thing, talking about the feminine advantage. Another, feminine is very community oriented, but a lot of it has been like, trauma bonding or gossiping or whatnot, and shifting that to using it to serve us. And that, I'm going to get to a whole conversation around media and all that. That's kind of done that. But being surrounded, not just by women, men as well, but a community that is willing to hold me in through the ups and the downs, so that I can continue to grow and thrive. And so I'd say that's what's helped me.
I love that. I think we should do a whole other live on specifically that, because that is where we start leaning into it. So Dr. Sweta, thank you so much. Where can people reach out, connect with you? Where's the best place?
So I'm Dr. Sweta Chawla on my website, on LinkedIn, on Instagram as well. So please reach out. I love connecting with people. So if you have any questions, or you just want to share some takeaways from our talk, I'd love to hear from you.
And be sure to mention, if you're reaching out on LinkedIn, that you saw her on the show, so she'll know where you're coming from. All right. So next week, August 3rd, blows my mind, I have the marvelous Mary Fain Brandt. She's going to be talking about the importance of authenticity, so we're just kind of continuing on this conversation. So join us next week, again, August 10th, 10 a.m. East Coast, 7 a.m. Pacific, which is where Dr. Sweta is. So thank you for getting up early. All right. We'll see everyone next week. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.